Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art and culture, and today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Ciara, titled Jackie. So here's the thing, even though I was a teenager who listened to a lot of pop music in the mid-2000s, I never really got into R&B in a big way. Part of it was that I was busy listening to symphonic metal at the time, but part of it was that the mid to late 2000s wasn't exactly a great period for the genre, at least in the mainstream and especially for its female artists. I mean, sure, you had your Beyonce, Alicia Keys, and Mary J. Blige, but the R&B boom of the 90s and early 2000s had faded significantly in the wave of crunk and the rising swell of pop. The male stars of the genre, they tend to fare a little bit better, with Usher, Neo, Chris Brown, and even Justin Timberlake raking in significant rewards. But many of the starlets who had done exceedingly well in the years prior, they began to struggle a little bit coming into the end of the decade. And one of those artists was Ciara. Now let me admit right out of the gate, I was never really a huge fan of hers. Her lyrics were frequently underwhelming when they didn't just get weird for no adequately explained reason. She occasionally worked with some obnoxious co-stars, especially in the era of crunk, and her voice was so thin and delicate that it often seemed peripheral to her music, analogous to Janet Jackson, but often lacking that core of strength and personality that I tended to like about a lot of Janet Jackson's work. And yet, in the era of snap percussion and incredibly minimalist beats, Ciara just thrived for a couple years. She was huge. But as pop started to take over in the late 2000s, Ciara's material seemed to get a little bit desperate to hold on to the spotlight. And that third album, Fantasy Ride, with its murderer's row of top-line producers and guest stars, ironically only stole more of the spotlight away from her. After her follow-up Next Year Basic Instinct that did even worse, I assumed, like many, that Ciara's career was just kind of over. And yet in 2013, she came back with a self-titled album with the rising tide of R&B. She was back on the charts. Now, I'm not going to say that that record is great. It's not. Like most of Ciara's work, it tended to find it pretty thin and uneven, as I tend to like my R&B a little bit more soulful and fiery. Although Ciara's voice was definitely becoming more rich with age, and I did like that. And the two Future collaborations on that album did not help, both of which I assume were there because they were in a relationship at that time. But 2 years later, the scene has changed. Her engagement broke off with Future, her first child was born, her album quietly filled with some more material focusing on that broken relationship, and more co-writers and producers than ever, especially Dr. Luke. And as I said, I've never really been a huge fan of Ciara's, but I really liked her debut single from this album, I Bet. And hey, if she's gonna spend an entire record taking pot shots at Future for being a cheating asshole, that's a theme I can get behind. So okay, how did Jackie turn out? Well, for me, it came out like a lot of other Ciara albums. A couple of really solid tracks, a few duds, and overall kind of feeling all over the place, and a little bit unsubstantial for it. But even though we didn't get the 11 solid tracks thrashing Future that the world desperately needs, it's still enjoyable enough, and all the more evidence that Ciara is the spiritual successor to Janet Jackson on the charts, which that satisfies me just fine, I'll take it. So let's start with Ciara herself, and let me start by saying that for the longest time, the reason that I had a hard time getting into her was her very light, very airy tone in her voice. And yeah, sure, it was pretty, and it worked as a good counterpoint against the more aggressive production, even as she did match that production lyrically, but many times her vocals felt peripheral to the instrumentation or to the guest stars, even though Ciara just did make it look really easy. But starting on the self-titled album, and especially here, Ciara's charisma and comfort against this level of production has really started paying a lot of dividends. And what works in her favor is that she never makes it sound like work, which I really like. Now, there is a lot more vocal production than I would prefer, and I definitely argue that her jumping on flows that sound like a fusion of Migos, Nicki Minaj, and Azalea Banks like on Bad Motherfucker, they aren't always the best fit. But her voice is maturing naturally and developing more weight with age, which is only a positive. Granted, I'll definitely say she's a better fit at the softer R&B tones and more aggressive Beyonce-esque belting, and there are moments where the latter is just completely underwhelming, like One Woman Army, which already sounds like a less impressive Salute by Little Mix, which was basically Beyonce's Run the World to begin with. Now this inevitably leads to the production and the instrumentation, which, as I said, really is all over the place, and sometimes even within the songs. Take Bad Motherfucker, which starts off with sweeping strings and orchestral bombast, but then drops into this weedy synth line and hi-hats that seems like an exercise in atonal annoyance, complete with Nicki Minaj-esque cackles, which I did not like, but then a minute later drops into this seething, borderline lo-fi backing synth and snapping percussion and oily synth line that would have been a much more natural transition coming off of the intro. It comes from many moments of the instrumentation just getting in their own way of each other, even on tracks that I do like, often in the form of sample vocal fragments like on I Bet from Future, or oily little synth pieces that are just a little bit too tinny for their own good, like in the back chorus of Stuck on You, that actually is an electric guitar which you could have and should have easily driven the entire song, or the blubbery, glitchy whooshes all over Fly. And then there's just odd moments here, like on Stuck on You, where the opening beat is slightly off rhythm, or the terrible lo-fi synthline and militaristic vibe of One Woman Army. And yeah, I know the military vibe is the point of the song, but it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine. Fusing military elements into pop and R&B songs it really rubs me the wrong way, just saying. As throughout the majority of her career though, Ciara's best songs on Jackie, they're stripped back, minimalist melodies with gleaming synths, a solid percussion line, and enough multi-tracking and reverb to intensify her presence, even though she doesn't need it in the same way anymore. Like on Dance Like We're Making Love, Give Me Love, or Kiss and Tell. What surprised me here was how damn good Ciara sounds against more acoustic instrumentation like I Got You and I Bet. Given how her voice has matured, lightweight guitar, it's a great compliment with its warmth, analogous to the way it helped Jhené Aiko on Sold Out. Unfortunately, we don't get enough of either that particular style. Instead, we get a lot of songs that tend toward the fuzzier side of the pop R&B spectrum with Fly and That's How I'm Feeling, which proves that Esther Dean's voice gets grating with gratuitous auto-tune, Pitbull always tends to be kinda lousy on guest verses, and it leaves Missy Elliott to just run away with the whole song. She just owns it. Now this takes us to the lyrics, and unfortunately, there's not a lot here, I'm sorry. That's one of the reasons I was hoping for an all-out breakup album, because this being Ciara's 6th record, there's a fair few tracks that seem to fall into a bit of a holding pattern that she's done before. Empowerment anthems, dance jams, sex jams, and the helpful differentiation of the rest. And lyrically, look, it's kinda hit and miss here. Take Lullaby, a song that interpolates Nelly's dilemma, but then tries to play that she's trying to knock out this guy with all the hot sex she's giving, like she's Floyd Mayweather. Yeah, even if the timing is relevant, it's not a good comparison to a despicable man who happened to be put on a piss-poor and excruciatingly overhyped show last weekend. But on the other hand, you've got songs like Dance Like We're Making Love or Give Me Love, and there are very few in the industry who are as effective at making these sort of tracks as Ciara. She's good at this. And that's before we get to songs that are more unique to this record, like the pretty sweet song to her son, I Got You, honestly a little bit saccharine, probably doesn't belong on this album, or Kiss and Tell, a song that's a lyrical equivalent of the Lonely Island's I Just Had Sex, but Ciara plays it with enough joyous energy to make it believable, and why shouldn't she make a song like this? And then there's I Bet, which I've talked before on Billboard Breakdown. It is easily the best song on this album, for capturing the complicated ending of her relationship with Future, half calm assertion of dominance and acceptance, and half genuine remorse that she had to leave him. That's one thing that I really do like about this album. Ciara might be a more soft-spoken R&B starlet in comparison with Beyonce or K. Michelle, but she's no less assertive and present, and there's a real core of strength to the vulnerability on this record that I actually found startlingly charming. In other words, she does a really good job with the songs when they are written to the right standard. So yeah, I actually kind of like this album, even though I don't think it's stellar or even all that great. Sadly, there's too many production missteps and mishaps and only average writing to elevate it beyond that, and more than its fair share of filler tracks that could have been replaced with a little bit more invective or fire here. As it is, it'll definitely please the fans, and to show that even if Ciara isn't exactly advancing as an artist in the way that some of her R&B contemporaries are, she is maturing, and that's a good step for her. For me, it's a strong 6 out of 10, and definitely a recommendation. Give it a listen, and while you might not like it better than some of her stuff in the mid-2000s, you might find more to like it than you realized. I certainly did. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.